IBP data validation, DP legacy forecast. First, it's complicated. We will need to convert APO legacy demands to IBP consensus demand. And it's not a one-to-one match. APO is usually at sold to or strategic customer, while IBP is at ship to customer. APO is also at calendar week, while IBP is at technical week. There will also be exceptions, most of which we would never think of on our own, but here are a few. New APO products that have not yet been sold will not have automatic master data in IBP. The sales order history used in APO may be different than IBP. Second, we don't have a lot of time to do this task. We only have 2 weeks for production cutover. And this is only one task of many that must be completed. So it's critical we use non-prod as a dress rehearsal to identify as many issues as possible. Third, this is not our first rodeo. We have a defined process to limit the need for manual interventions. 2, actually, depending on which legacy system you're coming from, but they are similar. Here is the process if you are already on ECC. If you aren't, you have an extra large step. So let's walk through this process. If you have manual additions or edits to the master data, for example, new product introduction, then the first step will be to copy them in. It's unlikely you would have these in non-prod, but in prod, you should already know many of your manual edits. Notice that this step is done by the business, not IT, which usually doesn't like changing data directly. Make sure for any manual edits you are leveraging the record type attributes in IBP to easily distinguish master data that was automatically loaded versus manually created. Notice that these are also prerequisites to the actual loading of data during cutover and can be done as soon as the user has access to that system, but before we lock out users of APO. Now let's look at what IBP will be doing. These are the prerequisites done by IT prior to APO data conversion. First, we make a backup of the planning area if this is being done in production. Second, we will load the sales order history data into IBP. This requires that IBP master data has also been loaded. Third, IT will run the proportional factor calculations. This is a scheduled daily job in both non-prod and prod, but it's important that the values are populated, so we call it out here. Fourth, if this is production, we will save critical key figures to temporary key figures, for example, consensus demand. Remember, planning areas are shared and businesses are already live, so we want to make sure whatever we do does not impact them. Fifth, we will delete any values in legacy ag key figures. This is just to make sure we are starting with a clean slate. If they were populated by another business unit, they should have already been live for some time. Sixth, we will delete any key figures that we plan to populate with this legacy data, for example, collab override or sales uplift, just to make sure there was nothing in those key figures prior to our activities. With the prereqs done, we need to lock users out of the legacy system, or at least let them know that any changes would not come over to IBP automatically. Step 1, we load the legacy APO demand data directly into IBP. It goes into the legacy AG01 key figure, which is at the week, product, location, strategic customer level. This will be important later. An error report is generated to show any records that failed to load. See why loads go bad for a few scenarios. Step 2, the business compares the values in the legacy APO system to what was loaded into IBP. They can also review the error report to find issues. This is somewhat manual since we are crossing over two systems, but if you do it in the aggregate, it's pretty easy. Checking product by product could prove a bit tedious, so start at the top and work down. The business needs to get this data as close as reasonable to 100%, but just be aware there may be examples, for example, difference of 1 unit, they may not be value added. Step 3, the most likely error is going to be caused by missing master data, so you will need to resolve these issues and probably reload. Doing that a couple of times in non-prod is less of an issue, but you don't want to do it multiple times in prod since time is limited. There is no point going to the next step without these previous steps being solid, since you will just compound your errors. Step 4, at this point the data is in IBP, but it is only at the strategic customer level. Remember, APO does not have the ship to customer detail, so we will need to disaggregate the strategic customer to ship to customer. This is an automated IT process, so as long as the right master data is there, you should be fine. Step 5, with the data now disaggregated, you need to validate any missing errors. This is a little easier than step 2 since we are all in the same IBP system. In fact, there are specific key figures and alerts that will pinpoint the exact differences. See why data goes bad for exact resolutions to these errors, but the answer is usually you don't have the right record in customer source. Step 6, as before, you will need to resolve these issues, which may require a repeat of step 4. But if the validations match out and the differences are acceptable, then you are ready to process to the next cutover steps. For example, run statistical forecasting. Let's look at a recent cutover to see how well it worked out. This is a real-life example of the different key figures used to validate this data transformation. We have the next 11 full months, but you could do any time period. We are using 4 key figures. Legacy quantity AG01 consensus. This is the key figure we use to hold the initial value from legacy APO. Remember, this is at weak prod loc strat, and it requires a manual validation with legacy APO to make sure that the values are very close, if not exact. In this case, we did have some discrepancies between APO and IBP, but it was less than 1,000 units in total, so less than 0.001%. Mostly incorrect forecasts in APO that we did not want to perpetuate in IBP. Collab override quantity. This is the key figure we use to disaggregate from legacy AG1 2, since this is the last editable key figure before consensus demand plan quantity. Once the business is comfortable with how IBP is working, they can easily remove this legacy demand quantity. In this case, you can see the difference of 3.05% or 97% accuracy, which was caused by different scenarios, usually a missing customer source record or an inactive product. Consensus demand plan quantity. Before running stat forecast, you will see that collab equals consensus. But once stat is run, it is common for specific weak product location ship to customer combinations to slip through due to a valid sales order history and no legacy forecast. In this case, the error was much greater initially and required stopping the stat forecast in several items to resolve at a future date. But it is easier to run stat and stop it on specific items than not run stat at all and tell yourself you'll do it at some future date. Total accuracy is now 98.03%. Consensus demand plan quantity export. This is simply what we will be exporting out of IBP every week. The difference between this and consensus demand plan is due to the product location status being 99 or being 50 with a date in the future, or the use of kill consensus. In this case, we had a few situations where either the status 50 date changed during the week or changed to status 99. Total net accuracy now stands at 97.93%. Again, that's high level business unit accuracy. You would drill down into the data to find major errors and correct them. There are a couple of lessons. Number one, 90% accuracy is easy. Number two, 100% accuracy is extremely difficult. Number three, lesson number one gives you a false sense of security. Number four, lesson number two makes you understand value add. In other words, your first dress rehearsal will give you a pretty high accuracy, greater than 90%. So you will think we are overreacting to how difficult this stuff is. But when you try to get to 100%, you realize things get increasingly harder. We call it long tail risk. Eventually you realize there is little value added to fixing a difference of 2 units. Just keep this all in mind when someone asks you why APO forecasts aren't matching IBP forecasts exactly. If that doesn't work, just make them sit through this video. As always, thanks for watching Practical IBP. Don't forget to like and subscribe.